What's up everyone, welcome back to another tutorial. So in this tutorial we're going to be covering my workflow for texturing airport terminals for Exploit. So as you can see, I have an airport terminal blend file loaded up, and this is the airport terminal for Hilton Head Airport, and that is an old project from like last year. I think this model is like 1 year old at least. We ended up not continuing with that project, so I'm gonna leave a link in the description to that if you want to download this terminal and want to check out how I organize my project, you know, all my export settings. But I'll be covering all the information you need for texturing a terminal in terms of the workflow in this video. Just a little disclaimer before we start: this is not a full walkthrough of me texturing the terminal. It's a general overview of the workflow and all the information that you need to know in order for you to be able to do this yourself. I'm also going to try to pack as much information as I can because I know, like, I've been doing this for like 4 years. You might run into some issues in very specific situations. Let's go ahead and get into it. So actually, before I get started, this tutorial is an intermediate tutorial. I'm assuming that you know how to model. I'm assuming that you know how to texture in Blender or in Substance Painter. I'm going to be covering both workflows separately in this tutorial. But I'm assuming that you do know that, and if you don't, then I highly recommend you first watch my tutorial on how to model in Blender, how to texture in Blender or Substance Painter. I have multiple tutorials for that you can use, and then you can come back to this tutorial if you want. So notice my outliner has terminal structure, drop off structures, windows, pillars, doors, container, AC base. So all these collections, basically they represent a root collection that you can check in the Xplane export settings in scene properties. So whenever you check a root collection when you're exporting, you're basically saying, okay, so let's say I check these three. So I'm basically saying I want to export 3 objects. So each collection represents an object. And the reason why we are splitting our objects, so you'll notice for the most part, there is 1 object per collection. The reason why we're splitting is because if we select everything, we go into UV editing, we select all the faces, you'll see that we have a lot of faces, right? So if we were to unwrap them into one single texture sheet, that would be pretty catastrophic. These faces on the texture sheet cover a certain amount of pixels. So the less pixels amount they cover, the lower quality they're going to turn out to be. The workaround would be to split the objects and have multiple texture sheets instead of just one. So here for terminal structure, you can see this is mostly just the walls and the roof of the terminal. It has its own texture sheet, its own UV map. So if we go to drop off structures, which are these huts here in the back, if we select everything, you can see it has its own UV map as well. And you can see it's the same for all of these. So container has its own UV map. So you get the point. For most of these, I have one object, but for misc items, the misc items object here has multiple objects. So the reason why I have multiple objects is obviously because I consider these objects my less important objects. So the fence, I know that the fence, these handrails, the door handles, the lights, to me they're not as important, and I think we can get away with much lower resolution on them. So like even if it's just a single plain color that I use in texturing, it's gonna look fine. So given that I know that, I can just like organize all of the less important objects together in one collection and UV unwrap all of these into a single UV map. So all of these 4 objects have one UV map, and they're going to be exported under misc items. So you can like strategically, you don't have to do a separate object for each and every little thing. So if you texture in Blender, go ahead and skip to the timestamp posted on screen, because right now I'm going to cover a lot of information that only Substance people need to know. So if you texture in Substance Painter, then basically once you have all your objects split up like this, you're going to want to add 1 material per category. So here I have terminal structure, drop off structures, windows. They all have 1 material, and obviously if you know how to texture in Substance Painter or have watched my Substance Painter tutorial, you'll know that this is the reason for this is so that each of these objects has their own texture set. So for misc items, you only need 1 material, obviously, because it's only 1 category. It's only 1 texture set that we need for that. And once you're done adding the materials, then you can just select everything, go to File, Export as either an FBX or a wavefront OBJ. So obviously if you texture in Substance Painter, I'm assuming you know how to import your object. You just click on New, select, and then select your object, and then document resolution, I usually do 4K, normal map format OpenGL, and then you click OK to load in the maps. you go to your baking settings, bake mesh maps. You bake all the maps. I like to bake all my maps at 4K. Even if I don't end up exporting every single map at 4K, I like to have the good quality for the renders. So once you bake your mesh maps, just texture as normal. You can see I have all this textured normally, have a whole bunch of decals, a lot of dirt masks on each thing. And once you're done texturing, then you would go up here to File, Export Resources, of course. I'm pretty sure if you texture in Substance or have watched my tutorial, you already know how to do this, but I'm going to show you anyway. Output directory, just select whatever, Hilton Head Airport, select folder, and obviously you scroll down to explain based on each texture set size. Okay, so here's where I need you to pay attention. So you're usually in global settings. I want you to go down to MISC items, click this, and then click on size, and then make it something like maybe 1024. Honestly, I don't even think it needs to be high quality, so you could even do 512. For pillars, again, I don't think this needs to be high quality at all, so maybe 1024 would be fine. If we take a look at the UV map, it like for pillars, let's see, where is pillars? Okay, pillars, you can see it covers most of the map, so I think 1024 should be fine. Terminal structures, obviously we're going to want that to be 4K because that covers most of the roof and the walls. When you're deciding what resolution you want for each thing, I think it would be useful if you went back into Blender and checked how the UV map looks like. So for doors, like literally like this does not need to be that high quality, so because it covers a lot of pixel space, so you'll know that obviously you don't need as much quality because you don't need as many pixels. So I think we could do 1024 for the doors. For container, so this whole thing, I think we're gonna want at least 2048 on that. So once we set everything, make sure you keep this on based on each texture set size so that it takes into account all of these different sizes. And then, actually, I don't think I've exported this before, so let me go new folder, HSD textures, terminal, textures. Okay, so let's export there. Just hit export. And you see, as you can see, it's exporting each texture set with its own individual resolution. After texturing, you would basically be done. At this point, I would advise you to please skip to the timestamp, post it on the screen, because now I'm going to be explaining how it would work for people who want to texture in Blender. You can stay if you want, but obviously this wouldn't apply to you. So obviously, I'm assuming you've created your bake UV map. So at this point, I want you to look around your building and I want you to assess, okay, so what parts of the building can I lower the resolution for? Because at this point, you're going to create a whole bunch of image textures that you're going to bake to. So here, in my case, for example, frames can be a 512 by 512 texture because it's just going to be a plain color, and so can MISC items. So MISC items, taking a look at this, these can all be a plain color. I don't care if this is 512 or 1024. It wouldn't really affect the quality because it's just a plain color. Now, for terminal structure, because it is a more important part of the terminal, I'm going to set 4K resolution. So keep that stuff in mind when you're creating your image textures before baking for each individual material. Here you can see doors. If you go to the UV editing tab, just for another example, it's covering a major, it's an important part obviously, but most of it's going to be plain color and maybe some dirt texture if you added that. You can see it covers a lot of the map. It covers a lot of pixels, so I would comfortably be putting this at 1024. And yeah, just keep analyzing. For drop-off structures, we take a look at UV editing. Once again, you can see a lot of faces. We would need a lot of quality for drop-off structures, so this would be 4096. What I did, even though I textured in Substance, this would still be useful information for you. I put my terminal structure to 4096. Drop-off structures was also 4096. Container I set to 2048 by 2048. For pillars, I set I think 1024, just because if we take a look at the UV map, you can see it covers a lot of pixel size. For MISC items, I set 512 by 512 just because it's literally just a plain color for all of these maps. Actually, I might recommend even a higher quality than 512 for something like this, just because you can see the margin between the pixels isn't high. So you might want to consider increasing the quality a little bit to 1024. For AC basis, I think I did 1024. Yeah, I set those resolutions taking into account the importance of each part. So based on the importance, you can leverage the quality of each image texture that you create when you're adding them all in shading before baking. So once you bake and save all of your image textures, now we can move on to exporting. Okay, we're now ready to export because we have all our image textures baked. So what I do is I check every collection that I want to export as a root collection. I have textures for all of these objects. So for terminal structure, I have a texture for drop-off structure. So basically what you would do is do the same thing you usually would when exporting an explain object. Check it as a root collection and then link the textures, link normal metalness. If you want to add an LOD, you can, but just make sure that you select all of these as root collections because we're going to bulk export everything with its respective textures linked. Once you have linked every single texture to its respective object, as you can see, I already have done so. You can click on export OBJs, and as you can see here, I've filtered by date modified because I already exported this like maybe 10 minutes ago. You would have all your textures on all your objects, and now you can drag and drop this into your airport file. Personally, the way I would recommend laying this out in World Editor, I know this is a texturing tutorial, but I'll still throw this information out for you because it's probably going to be useful. Terminal structure is probably the first object I would place because you can see it covers most of the general. It's easier to line up in WED to the imagery, and it covers like most of the general structure. So once you've placed this in WED, I would just copy the coordinates of this object in World Editor and paste them to the rest of the objects, and then it should all line up in Xplane. So yeah, that should be it. I do have some tips if for specific situations. Okay, so let me just show you. So this is a project I recently worked on for Mango Studios. So if you have glass in your terminal, you would go down here where it says layer grouping. You want to select layer group objects and then layer group offset 1, and then I think that should be all. If you want to learn how to texture glass in Substance Painter, you can watch my glass tutorial for Substance. Another thing for Blender users who are texturing in Blender, when you're baking, make sure you disable all your other collections. So let's say you're baking pillars. Disable every other collection that isn't pillars. So here, maybe I can do Shift A. I don't know if there's a shortcut for that, but if you're baking a texture in Blender for pillars, disable everything else when you bake so that you don't risk anything going wrong with the other image textures. And I think that's pretty much all the advice I have for you guys. I hope you guys enjoy this tutorial. If you have any other suggestions for tutorials, please leave them in the comments. I do have some tutorials in the works for the near future, so please let me know what tutorials you would like covered, and I will take those into consideration as well.